A very good morning to all of you. Welcome once again on this platform of Gyan Sudha Success Sathi channel, an initiative of our Honorable Commissioner, College Education, Rajasthan, to help all those preparing for competitive exams. I am Dr. Vinita Srivastava from Assembly Government PG College, Nathdwara, District Rajsamand, Rajasthan. My today's session is devoted to euthanasia. Euthanasia is a very controversial issue. Mercy killing, assisted suicide, physician assisted suicide, happy release, merciful release. These are some of the synonyms of euthanasia. Euthanasia is an issue which encompasses the morals, values, and beliefs of our society. Those preparing for UPSC Civil Services examination will find this topic relevant as far as their general studies paper 2 is concerned, dealing with governance, NGO's role, policy for health and social sector. Those preparing for general studies paper 4, dealing with ethics, morals and values, will also find this topic relevant. Wikipedia defines euthanasia as the practice of intentionally ending a life to relieve pain and suffering. According to Wikipedia, euthanasia has been derived from the Greek word which means as good death or easy death. According to Collins English Dictionary, euthanasia is the practice of killing someone who is very ill and will never get better. It's the practice of killing someone in order to end their sufferings, usually done at their request or with their consent. So, euthanasia is understood as the killing of a patient suffering from an incurable and painful disease or an irreversible coma. There are some other instances also where some people want to end their life, but they do not want to commit suicide. In many cases, it is carried out at the person's request, but there are times when the person is unable to take any decision, like small children, somebody in coma, and like cases. And the decision is in such cases is taken by the relatives, medical professionals, and in some instances by the courts. So, we have till now understood that euthanasia is a practice of killing or letting person die due to severe illness or incurable diseases. But there have been cases where the persons were healthy and happy but still demanded euthanasia. They were of the opinion that we have lived our lives to the optimum level and we do not want to live anymore. We just want a dignified death. But at the same time, such persons did not want to commit suicide and demanded euthanasia. There are legal and moral issues associated with euthanasia. There are different euthanasia laws in each country. The British House of Lords Select Committee on Medical Ethics defines euthanasia as a deliberate intervention undertaken with the express intention of ending a life to relieve incurable suffering. In the Netherlands and Belgium, euthanasia is understood as termination of life by a doctor at the request of a patient. The Dutch law, however, does not use the term euthanasia, but includes it under the broader definition of assisted suicide and termination of life on request. Let us see the legal aspects of euthanasia. And in how many countries euthanasia has been legalized. As of March 2021, active human euthanasia is legal in the Netherlands, Belgium, Colombia, Luxembourg, Western Australia, Canada, and Spain. Assisted suicide is legal in Switzerland, Germany, and Australian state of Victoria, and the US states of Washington, Oregon, Colorado, Hawaii, Vermont, Maine, New Jersey, California, and the District of Columbia. Now let us try to understand what do we mean by voluntary euthanasia, non-voluntary euthanasia, or involuntary euthanasia. Euthanasia has been categorized in different ways, which include voluntary, non-voluntary, and involuntary euthanasia. Voluntary euthanasia is legal in some countries. Non-voluntary euthanasia, where patient's consent is unavailable, is illegal in all the countries. And involuntary euthanasia, hence without asking consent or against the patient's will, is also illegal in all countries and usually considered as murder. Euthanasia has been a much debated subject throughout the world. The debate has become increasingly significant because of the recent developments in Netherlands and England, whereby euthanasia has been allowed. As a result, many of the nations across the world are now hotly debating whether or not to follow the Dutch example. Recently, our Supreme Court in Arunas Case has already given its decision on this point and allowed passive euthanasia in India. At this point, let us try to analyze what is the difference between active euthanasia and passive euthanasia. Active euthanasia is when death is brought about by an act. For example, when a person is killed by being given an overdose of painkillers. Passive euthanasia is when death is brought about by an omission, that is when someone lets the person die. In other words, we can say that active euthanasia occurs when the medical professionals or another person deliberately do something that causes the patient to die. And passive euthanasia occurs when the patient dies because the medical professionals either don't do something necessary to keep the patient alive, or when they stop doing something that is keeping the patient alive. For example, switch off life support machines, disconnect a feeding tube, don't carry out a life-extending operation, don't give life-extending drugs. The moral difference between killing and letting die is quite obvious here. Many people make a moral distinction between active and passive euthanasia. They think that it is acceptable to withdraw or withhold treatment and allow a patient to die, but that it is never acceptable to kill a patient by a deliberate act. Some medical people like this idea. They think it allows them to provide a patient with the death they want without having to deal with the difficult moral problems they would face if they deliberately killed that person. But there is the other opinion that there is no such difference as such. This distinction is nonsense, since stopping treatment is a deliberate act and so is deciding not to carry out a particular treatment. In a nutshell, euthanasia is divided in two categories: active euthanasia and passive euthanasia. In active euthanasia, a person directly and deliberately causes the patient's death with lethal drug dosage. And in passive euthanasia, the patient refuses life-saving medical help. Let us analyze euthanasia from religious perspectives. What have been various morals and beliefs in various religions about euthanasia with particular reference to India? We are going to analyze this and we will focus on four major religions of India: Hinduism, Islam, Christianism and Sikhism. There are two Hindu views on euthanasia. The first view says that by helping to end a painful life, a person is performing a good deed and so fulfilling their moral obligations. But the other view says that by helping to end a life, even one filled with suffering, a person is disturbing the timing of the cycle of death and rebirth. This is a bad thing to do, and those involved in the euthanasia will take on the remaining karma of the patient. This same argument suggests that keeping a person artificially alive on a life support machines would also be a bad thing to do. However, the use of a life support machine as part of a temporary attempt at healing would not be a bad thing. The idea that death is a conscious death, and this means that palliative treatments will be a problem if they reduce mental alertness. Muslims are against euthanasia. They do believe that all human life is sacred because it is given by Allah and that Allah chooses how long each person will live. Human beings should not interfere in this. Euthanasia and suicide are not included among the reasons allowed for killing in Islam. Suicide and euthanasia, as per the directions under Islam, are explicitly forbidden. The directions say that do not take life which Allah made sacred other than in the course of justice. And no person can ever die except by Allah's leave and at an appointed term. It says, destroy not yourself. Surely Allah is ever merciful to you. However, some Islamic institutions have given different views as far as euthanasia is concerned. Islamic Code of Medical Ethics says that it is futile to diligently keep the patient in a vegetative state by heroic means. This means doctors can stop trying to prolong life in cases where there is no hope of a cure. Islamic Medical Association of America, known as IMANA, says that when death becomes inevitable, as determined by physicians taking care of terminally ill patients, the patients should be allowed to die without unnecessary procedures. So, while turning off a life support is allowed, hastening death with the use of certain pain-killing drugs is not at all allowed, as this would equate to euthanasia. Now let us see what Christians think about euthanasia. Christians are mostly against euthanasia. The arguments are usually based on the argument that life is a gift from God and that human beings are made in God's image. That birth and death are part of the life processes which God has created. So we should respect them. Therefore, no human being has the authority to take the life of any innocent person, even if that person wants to die. Sikhs derive their ethics largely from the teachings of their scripture, Guru Granth Sahib, and the Sikh code of conduct known as Rahit Maryada, meaning thereby rules of life. The Sikh gurus rejected suicide and by extension euthanasia as well. Sikh gurus rejected suicide and euthanasia as an interference in God's plan. Suffering, they said, was part of the operation of karma, and human beings should not only accept it without complaint, but act so as to make the best of the situation that karma has given them. There are some terms which need to be cleared to understand euthanasia. We've talked about voluntary, involuntary, and non-voluntary euthanasia. Here some more elaboration is required. That's why this slide. Actually, some ethicists distinguish between involuntary and non-voluntary euthanasia. They refer involuntary euthanasia as the euthanasia which is against the patient's wishes, and non-voluntary euthanasia is the euthanasia without the patient's consent, but wishes of the patient are unknown. In order to understand the legal scenario about euthanasia in India, we need to understand this term, persistent vegetative state. Actually, it refers to a chronic state of brain dysfunction in which person shows no signs of awareness. A living will is a new concept to the legal scenario of India. A living will is a written document by way of which a patient can give his explicit instructions in advance about the medical treatment to be administered when he or she is terminally ill or no longer able to express informed consent. It is more or less like the property will. Property will is a declaration about how the property will be dealt with when the person is no more here. So here we focus on Arunas case, which is a milestone as far as legal scenario of euthanasia in India is concerned. Arunas was a nurse in the KEM hospital of Mumbai. She was brutally attacked by a ward boy. As a result of the brutal assault, she went in coma and survived in consistent vegetative state for about 42 years. In 2009, the journalist activist Pinky Virani filed a petition in the Supreme Court under Article 32 of the Constitution of India, seeking legalization of mercy killing so that Aruna's suffering could be brought to an end by withdrawal of medical support. On the other hand, the KEM hospital nurses filed the counter petition in the case opposing mercy killing as they were happy to look after Aruna. But as a result of the petition filed in 2009 in this case, in 2011, the Supreme Court issued guidelines for positive euthanasia. Aruna passed away in May 2015 due to pneumonia. Though the guidelines regarding passive euthanasia were passed by the Supreme Court of India, but as per the guidelines, the decision for passive euthanasia is to be taken by parents, spouse, close relatives, or next friend. In this particular case, the activist journalist Pinky Virani was not considered as the next friend. Rather, the nurses of KEM hospital who have been serving Aruna for last so many years were considered as the next friend, and their decision was respected as far as Aruna's case was concerned. So, Aruna's case became a milestone in passing guidelines and directions regarding euthanasia, particularly passive euthanasia in India. Yet, passive euthanasia couldn't be applied in case of Aruna Shehbag, and she passed away in May 2015 due to pneumonia. So she was. Let us once again analyze what have been the milestones in legalizing euthanasia in India. First instance in this regard was the PIL filed by NGO Common Cause in 2005, seeking robust system of certification for passive euthanasia and legal recognition for living will in India. The second milestone was the PIL filed by Pinky Virani in Supreme Court of India in 2009 on behalf of Arunas case. She argued that the continued existence of Aruna is in violation of her right to live in dignity. On March 2011, the Supreme Court issued a set of broad guidelines legalizing passive euthanasia in India. As per the guidelines, the decision for passive euthanasia, that is, to withdraw treatment, nutrition, or water, and decision to withdraw life support must be taken by parents, spouse, or other close relatives, or in the absence of them, by a close friend. The decision requires an approval from the concerned High Court. As a result of various developments discussed earlier, euthanasia law has been passed in India. Active euthanasia by administering an injection is illegal in India. Passive euthanasia is legal in India after March 2011 judgment by Supreme Court. This was particularly referred to Arunas case. Since March 2018, passive euthanasia is legal in India under strict guidelines. Patients must consent through a living will and must be terminally ill or in a vegetative state. So, passive euthanasia is permitted by Supreme Court in two situations. First one is that brain dead patient whereby the ventilator can be switched off, and second, persistent vegetative state where the feeds water can be tapered off along with addition of pain managing palliatives. The debate about euthanasia is still on, not only in India but also in various parts of the world. What to legalize? Why to legalize? Is it ethically right to legalize euthanasia or not? Is it morally right to legalize euthanasia or not? Is it religiously right to legalize euthanasia or not? What is the guarantee that the euthanasia laws will not be misused? With so many pros and cons, we all may have a different opinion about euthanasia. And in near future, there is every probability that we will observe various changes in the legal scenario as far as euthanasia or mercy killing is concerned. So students, through this session, we have tried to understand this very serious, controversial and debatable issue known as euthanasia, also popularly known as mercy killing, assisted suicide, physician assisted suicide, merciful release, happy release, etc. I hope that you must have got some new insights about this euthanasia. This is all from my side as far as this topic is concerned. Thank you very much.